The sun had barely risen over the Tennessee fields when whispers began, soft and trembling, as if the earth itself feared what it had witnessed. The rows of corn swayed like ghostly sentinels, shadows stretching unnaturally long. Josiah Henson's bare feet pressed into the cold soil, each step a silent testament to the lives tethered to this land. No one spoke of what happened here at night, but the children, even the youngest, would huddle and shiver, recounting nightmares they didn't fully understand. Beyond the overseer's house, a dilapidated barn held more than tools. It held secrets that lingered in the air like damp smoke. Some claimed they heard faint cries coming from its dark interior, though every inspection yielded only silence. Henson, even as a young man, noticed patterns, disappearances that authorities dismissed, odd bruises hidden beneath sleeves, and the fleeting, haunted looks of those who had witnessed too much. It was in these fields, where the soil was rich but the heart of man was corrupt, that Henson first learned the language of fear, survival, and hidden resistance. The whispers were warnings, not of nature, but of a darkness cultivated by human hands. And beneath the surface, in the hidden corners of the plantation, a story was stirring, a story no one was meant to uncover. In the town beyond the plantation, the orphanage loomed like a cathedral of despair. Its walls, cracked and blackened by decades of neglect, seemed alive, breathing in the sorrow of the children it housed. By day, it appeared orderly, the kind of place that could be praised in church bulletins, but by night, the air changed. Whispers turned to wails, shadows moved independently of light, and small hands pressed against barred windows trembled with silent pleas. Henson visited once, delivering food and books to the children under the guise of charity. What he saw behind locked doors and curtained hallways haunted him. Some children were marked, literally, scratched, branded, or hidden away for reasons no one dared to question. Those who tried to speak were silenced by threats or disappearances that left no trace. The town's clergy looked the other way, their sermons perfumed with righteousness, their hearts glazed with convenient ignorance. It was here that Henson began to see the threads connecting families, churches, and the plantations, threads of control, exploitation, and buried atrocities. A story of invisible hands shaping lives, binding them in fear, and burying truths beneath layers of false morality. Each encounter left him more determined, yet more aware of the peril he faced in simply knowing too much. One summer night, the sky above the plantation ignited in an unnatural red glow. Fires, some said, but Henson knew better. This was a warning. Smoke billowed, carrying with it the acrid scent of burning wood and suppressed secrets. In the distance, figures moved, cloaked in shadow, performing rituals that belonged more to folklore than to the human world. Henson's instincts screamed, but his body moved as if drawn by invisible chains. He observed, hidden among the corn, as men and women, some in church robes, some in tattered coats, enacted acts that blurred the line between justice and cruelty. Children were there, forced to witness, to learn obedience and terror, their eyes reflecting the crimson sky as if the heavens themselves condemned the acts. The night was not an anomaly. It was a pattern, a recurring echo of what the plantation demanded of its inhabitants. Henson felt the weight of generations pressing down, not just of slavery, but of systemic corruption that infiltrated homes, schools, and churches. The red sky would haunt him in dreams, a spectral reminder that some truths were never meant to be seen, yet could not be unseen once discovered. Beneath the old plantation house, Henson discovered a hidden passage, a narrow tunnel, carved into the earth long before his arrival. It smelled of damp stone and decay, but more importantly, it smelled of secrets. He followed it, his torch casting long, flickering shadows, until he reached a room that had been sealed for decades. Inside were artifacts of lives erased, small shoes worn down to the soles, letters stained with tears, and jars containing unidentifiable remnants, catalogued with meticulous cruelty. The room was a map of suffering, a testament to the control exerted over bodies, minds, and spirits. Henson realized that these were not isolated incidents. They were deliberate, methodical acts intended to teach fear, obedience, and silence. It was in that chamber that Henson's resolve crystallized. He understood that survival was not enough. Witnessing without action was complicity. Yet even as he planned, he felt the oppressive gaze of unseen eyes, the awareness that the plantation itself, and perhaps the town beyond, had mechanisms to detect those who knew too much. The walls seemed to breathe, the floorboards whispered, and Henson knew that every step forward would carry the risk of annihilation, not just of his body, but of his mind and soul. The night was not an anomaly. It was a pattern, a recurring echo of what the plantation demanded of its inhabitants. Henson felt the weight of generations pressing down, not just of slavery, but of systemic corruption that infiltrated homes, schools, and churches. The red sky would haunt him in dreams, a spectral reminder that some truths were never meant to be seen, yet could not be unseen once discovered. Beneath the old plantation house, Henson discovered a hidden passage, a narrow tunnel, carved into the earth long before his arrival. It smelled of damp stone and decay, but more importantly, it smelled of secrets. He followed it, his torch casting long, flickering shadows, until he reached a room that had been sealed for decades. Inside were artifacts of lives erased, small shoes worn down to the soles, letters stained with tears, and jars containing unidentifiable remnants, catalogued with meticulous cruelty. The room was a map of suffering, a testament to the control exerted over bodies, minds, and spirits. Henson realized that these were not isolated incidents. They were deliberate, methodical acts intended to teach fear, obedience, and silence. It was in that chamber that Henson's resolve crystallized. He understood that survival was not enough. Witnessing without action was complicity. Yet even as he planned, he felt the oppressive gaze of unseen eyes, the awareness that the plantation itself, and perhaps the town beyond, had mechanisms to detect those who knew too much. The walls seemed to breathe, the floorboards whispered, and Henson knew that every step forward would carry the risk of annihilation, not just of his body, but of his mind and soul. One evening, Henson attended a service in a chapel that had long claimed moral authority over the town. The congregation sang hymns that echoed through the high, arched ceilings, but a chill ran down his spine. In the back pew, a stranger watched him, not with curiosity, but with calculation. The man's eyes were dark, almost inhuman, and his presence seemed to bend the very air around him. During the sermon, words about virtue and divine justice clashed with the silence of unspoken horrors. Henson felt a connection, subtle but undeniable, between the stranger and the plantation's hidden cruelties. The man vanished as suddenly as he appeared, leaving behind a sense of foreboding that Henson could not shake. That night, the dreams came with faces he had never seen but somehow knew, and voices that whispered warnings in tongues long dead. This encounter marked a turning point. Henson understood that the corruption he faced was not isolated. It was institutional, spiritual, and generational. The chapel, the town, the orphanage, the hidden rooms, they were all nodes in a network of control, feeding on fear and silence. He had glimpsed the architecture of oppression, and he knew that exposing it would require more than courage. It would demand confrontation with darkness itself. Henson discovered a ledger hidden beneath the floorboards of the overseer's office, its leather cover cracked and stained with age. The entries were meticulous, listing names, ages, and dispositions, a cold, bureaucratic euphemism for children taken, punished, or disappeared. Some entries were crossed out, others smudged as if by tears or deliberate obfuscation. Each line told a story of systematic cruelty. Children with blue eyes, families who resisted, the elderly who tried to protect them, none escaped the record. Henson ran his fingers over the ink, sensing the weight of countless souls compressed into pages. It was as if the ledger itself whispered secrets, warning him of dangers he had not yet seen. This was the blueprint of fear, a network that extended beyond the plantation, into churches, orphanages, and towns. Henson understood that the ledger was more than a record. It was a map of power, a tool wielded by men who measured human lives like currency. The knowledge it contained was forbidden, and yet he could not stop himself from reading, for each entry revealed truths too significant to ignore. Children began to disappear, not all at once, but gradually, in a pattern so precise that only someone watching closely could detect it. Henson noticed small beds left unmade, tiny shoes abandoned in corners, and whispers in the night that seemed to speak their names. No one questioned their absence. Families were silenced with warnings, or they themselves disappeared, swallowed by the same shadows that claimed the children. Henson pieced together a terrifying theory. The town's institutions, churches, orphanages, and plantations, were complicit in a cycle of abduction and erasure, maintained to instill obedience and hide crimes from outsiders. One night, Henson followed faint cries into the woods beyond the town. There, beneath twisted roots and brambles, he found a hidden enclosure, barely large enough for a dozen children, starved, frightened, and branded with marks he had seen before. The air was thick with the scent of fear, sweat, and decay. He realized the horror was organized, ritualized, and systematic. Every detail of his world had been corrupted, and the true monsters were not the shadows but the people who controlled them. The church pulpit, gleaming under candlelight, hid more than religious authority. Henson found journals belonging to ministers that chronicled sermons given while atrocities unfolded behind the walls. Words of salvation intertwined with instructions on obedience, punishment, and complicity. Henson read lines describing children as sacrificial instruments for moral teaching, families punished for questioning authority, and disappearances sanctified under the guise of divine order. The ink was fresh in places, suggesting the practice had not ceased. It had evolved, silently, like a cancer. The church, the orphanages, the plantations, they were branches of the same tree of corruption. Henson realized that confronting one institution would not suffice. The rot extended beyond visible structures, into hearts, souls, and rituals. Each sermon, each hymn, each prayer became a mask for control, a method of embedding fear so deep that even the victims could not name it. Henson witnessed a procession unlike any he had ever seen. Cloaked figures moved through the plantation at midnight, chanting words older than the town itself. The march seemed choreographed, deliberate, a silent promise of obedience enforced by the unseen hand of tradition. Children were herded along paths lined with firelit torches, their eyes wide with terror. Adults who resisted were struck down silently, carried away without sound. Henson hid, watching, unable to intervene, yet forced to understand. The rhythm of the march was hypnotic, the chants like a spell binding the participants to a collective conscience of horror. It became clear that these rituals were not mere superstition. They were instruments of systemic control, a psychological machine designed to condition fear across generations. Henson's resolve hardened. He would uncover every secret, trace every hidden path, and expose the machinery of oppression, no matter the cost. A recurring figure haunted Henson's observations. The man always appeared at the edge of chaos, the chapel, the orphanage, the plantation fields. His presence was a silent threat, a reminder that knowledge alone could endanger life. Henson never learned his name, but his eyes conveyed intent, the kind that could crush spirit with a glance. One evening, Henson confronted him in the woods, demanding answers. The man spoke in riddles, revealing glimpses of a network older and more sinister than the plantation itself. "You see, young man," he whispered, "truth is a luxury few can survive." His words lingered like smoke, heavy and suffocating. The encounter marked a psychological turning point. Henson realized the battle was not merely physical. It was mental, spiritual, and moral. To expose the truth would require navigating a labyrinth of lies, fear, and ancient corruption, and every step forward could unravel his own sanity. Yet retreat was no longer an option. The unseen eyes were watching, and the hidden machinery of oppression demanded reckoning. Beneath the oldest wing of the plantation house, Henson discovered a cellar sealed by a heavy iron door. Its hinges were rusted, its lock broken by time and neglect, yet it radiated an unmistakable sense of dread. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and the faint metallic tang of old blood. Broken furniture lay scattered, and the walls were etched with symbols that seemed to shift when looked at directly. Henson's torch illuminated remnants of lives erased, discarded dolls with hollow eyes, scorched blankets, and jars filled with strange powders. Each item whispered the unspoken stories of children and families the town had swallowed without record. The deeper he explored, the more he realized that the cellar was not simply storage. It was a shrine to control, fear, and ritual. Every corner hinted at generations of systematic cruelty, carefully concealed beneath layers of plantation order. Henson felt an oppressive presence, as if the cellar itself remembered every scream, every injustice, every soul broken within its walls. The knowledge weighed on him like a physical force. He understood that he had stumbled upon a nexus of evil so potent that the act of witnessing alone was an invitation for it to claim him. In the town, Henson discovered families whose silence was deafening. Neighbors who smiled during the day turned their faces away at night. Their children, once bright and laughing, walked with haunted eyes, whispering secrets they were too frightened to articulate. These were the silent witnesses, survivors molded into secrecy, guardians of truths too dangerous to share. Henson learned to listen, not just to words, but to pauses, glances, and the tension in trembling hands. Every subtle reaction was a cipher, revealing more about the mechanisms of fear than any confession. He realized that terror was not just punishment, it was education. The town had perfected a system of psychological domination, one that infiltrated homes, churches, and schools, teaching obedience through absence, disappearance, and whispered threats. Each encounter left Henson both horrified and determined. He understood that exposing the truth would require unraveling a network that thrived on complicity, intimidation, and carefully cultivated ignorance. These silent witnesses were not powerless. They were keys to understanding a darkness that had endured for generations. One moonless night, Henson followed the man in the shadows to a clearing deep in the woods. There, an assembly convened, masked and robed, chanting in unrecognizable dialects. The ritual seemed older than the town itself, a haunting cadence that bound participants to the unspoken laws of fear and control. Henson watched as adults, clergy, and overseers moved in synchronized patterns, performing gestures both ceremonial and cruel. Children were present, silent and trembling, their eyes wide as they learned obedience through terror. The masks obscured identity but magnified authority, stripping participants of individuality and turning them into instruments of the system. The assembly revealed the true architecture of oppression. It was not merely the plantation or town, but a ceremonial web that bound generations to ritualized control. Henson realized that dismantling the system would require confronting not only human cruelty, but the psychological machinery that sustained it. Henson discovered that documents chronicling abuses had been systematically destroyed or hidden. The town's records, ledgers, and church logs bore gaps, blacked-out entries, and pages that had been torn from existence. It was deliberate, an institutional erasure designed to make accountability impossible. Even when survivors whispered fragments of truth, they were dismissed as superstition or hysteria. Henson understood that knowledge itself was dangerous. Any record or testimony could invite scrutiny, punishment, or disappearance. The vanishing records were more than bureaucratic negligence. They were a weapon, ensuring the system remained invisible, untouchable, and eternal. This revelation steeled Henson's resolve. He realized that exposing the truth would require reconstructing history from fragments, whispers, and artifacts, tracing the dark threads that connected families, towns, and institutions, all while remaining invisible to those who thrived in the shadows. One night, after witnessing a particularly brutal ritual in the barn, Henson fled into the wilderness. The fields, familiar and treacherous, seemed alive, hiding watchers behind every tree and whispering warnings in the wind. Fear and adrenaline drove him forward, yet every step brought memories of what he had seen. Children's cries, families broken, and the unyielding presence of the man in the shadows. The night was a mirror of the plantation's darkness. Henson realized that the true horror was not just the acts themselves, but the omnipresence of surveillance, complicity, and control. The system extended beyond the plantation walls, into the town, the forests, and even the night itself. As he ran, Henson felt the weight of history pressing upon him, the generational trauma of those enslaved, hidden, and silenced. He knew that survival alone would not honor the lives lost. He had to bear witness, uncover secrets, and reveal the machinery of fear that had allowed such horrors to persist unnoticed. The flight was not escape. It It was the first step in confronting a darkness older than the plantation itself. Henson discovered hidden tunnels beneath the town, remnants of escape routes, secret meetings, and long-forgotten attempts to resist the system. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air was heavy with the scent of earth and decay. Here, he found graffiti etched by children, shorthand for hope, rebellion, and survival, a language only the oppressed could understand. The tunnels connected churches, orphanages, and even parts of the plantation, revealing an invisible infrastructure of resistance and oppression intertwined. Henson realized that the town's corruption had co-opted even the places designed for refuge, turning them into instruments of control. Yet, these tunnels also offered clues, maps to uncovering the deeper machinery of fear. Each step through the darkness brought both revelation and dread. Henson felt the presence of those who had disappeared guiding him, their silent voices pressing him forward. He understood that knowledge was dangerous, but power lay in witnessing and remembering. The tunnels were a metaphor for the hidden truths of the town, the past buried, the present manipulated, and the future uncertain, unless someone dared to illuminate the darkness. In the dead of night, Henson noticed faces appearing in windows of abandoned houses. Not ghosts, but reminders of the people consumed by the system. Children taken, families silenced, and those who tried to resist. The eyes in the glass seemed to follow him, reflecting sorrow, anger, and silent pleas. The faces were everywhere, symbolic of the omnipresent power structure that observed, judged, and manipulated. They reminded Henson that the horrors were not relics. They persisted, and the town's inhabitants were complicit, whether through fear or willful ignorance. The windows became mirrors of morality, confronting him with the weight of accountability and the stakes of uncovering hidden truths. Henson realized that the system fed not only on bodies but on conscience, bending morality until survival demanded complicity. To confront it, he would have to endure constant psychological assault, the unseen eyes watching every action, every word, every thought. One evening, Henson finally confronted the man in the shadows. In a hidden room beneath the chapel, the man spoke candidly, revealing the network of fear that had gripped the town for decades. Children were removed to prevent dissent, families broken to ensure loyalty, and records erased to maintain illusion. His words chilled Henson. Every revelation connected the plantation, town, and institutions in a web of intentional cruelty and systemic control. The man warned that exposing the truth would be met with resistance from generations of silence, power, and ritual. Yet Henson felt no choice. Bearing witness had become a moral imperative, a refusal to let history's darkest corners remain unrecorded. The confession illuminated the machinery of oppression, the psychology of fear, and the mechanisms by which communities hide horrors from the world, reminding Henson that some truths are so terrible they threaten to destroy both the observer and the observed. Henson organized what little evidence he could: documents, artifacts, witness accounts. The town seemed to respond, shadows shifting, whispers rising, as if aware that exposure was imminent. Families, clergy, and overseers, once untouchable, felt the weight of scrutiny pressing upon them. He presented the ledger, the cellar findings, and the hidden tunnels to a few trusted allies. Fear, denial, and confrontation rippled through the town. The rituals, massed assemblies, and orchestrated disappearances could no longer remain invisible. Henson understood that the act of revealing truth itself was a form of defiance, a reclaiming of power stolen by systemic cruelty. The reckoning was not immediate, but the first cracks appeared in the fortress of silence. Henson realized that history, memory, and courage could pierce even the deepest shadows, illuminating atrocities long concealed and giving voice to the silenced. Years later, Henson's story survived, whispered in tunnels, etched in journals, and carried by descendants of those who had endured. He became more than a man. He was a symbol of resilience, a guardian of forbidden knowledge, and a witness to systemic horrors that others sought to bury. The plantation, the town, and the institutions remained, but their control was fractured. Children's laughter returned to orphanages, families reclaimed spaces once denied to them, and the red sky of fear gradually faded. Henson's journey demonstrated that courage, memory, and the refusal to be silenced could challenge centuries of oppression. The legacy was a warning. Hidden corruption persists where silence dominates, but witnessing, recording, and confronting darkness are acts of rebellion. Henson's story was a map for future generations, a guide through the labyrinth of fear, and a testament to the enduring power of human resilience against systems designed to break the soul.